Hello, welcome to Ann Teaches Bible. Today we are starting in Luke chapter 7, verse 1. I believe we'll go through the first 17 verses. So, Luke 1, the first story is verses 1 through 10. When Jesus had finished saying all this to the people, he returned to Capernaum. Capernaum was kind of his home base. He would go out into different places, and now he just finished what we generally call the Sermon on the Mount, and so now he's gone back to his home base of Capernaum. At that time, the highly valued slave of a Roman officer was sick and near death. When the officer heard about Jesus, he sent some respected Jewish elders to ask him to come and heal his slave. So they earnestly begged Jesus to help the man. "If anyone deserves your help, he does," they said, "for he loves the Jewish people and even built a synagogue for us." Now, we need to kind of do a little quick. Back then, the Jewish people had been conquered by the Romans. And so, as any nation would be, some people would hate their conquerors, and there were many Jews back then who hated the Romans. And there, of course, were many Romans who hated the Jews. The Romans didn't want to be there in Israel, and the Jewish people didn't want them in Israel either. They could agree on that. And so sometimes the relations between the Roman soldiers, especially the Roman soldiers, and the Jewish people were very bad. But this man, he was a centurion, which tells us that he was a officer pretty high up. He had, it kind of depends on when in Roman history this story takes place. And so he had 80 to 100 men that he was in charge of. And so he had a good relationship with the Jewish people. He built them a synagogue, basically a church there in Capernaum. And so the Jewish people were saying, "Jesus, come and heal this man's slave." I wanted to address the fact that that meant he was a slave owner. And sometimes we have a tendency to say that this person is not worthy because he's doing wrong. He's a sinner. He owns slaves. I just wanted to remind you in Romans verse 3, chapter 3, verse 23, it simply says, "For all have sinned and fallen short of God's glory." And we've fallen short. Oh, I'm sorry, fallen short of God's glorious standard. And this is true. And so, from God's point of view, a slave owner versus you and me, not that far apart. Have you ever lied? Have you ever um, um, been angry and hit somebody or wanted to? These are sins in God's eyes. It's all sin. And so this man was a slave owner, but he was obviously a good, kind man, which some people may have trouble putting the two together. But it says here that was the highly, not he was, but his highly valued slave was sick and near death. And so, as a, so the centurion was good to this man, and he was kind, and he was concerned about him dying. So I just want to keep that in kind of a perspective. And another thing I thought I would mention, this is in 1 Samuel 16, chapter 16, verse 7. There was a man, I kind of jumped into the story, and there was a man, and God had asked him to choose a new king for Israel. Samuel was the judge, and that was what God asked him. So Samuel looks at this person who's standing before him and says, "Oh, this is a good guy. Look at how strong he is. Look, he will make a good king." And this is what Samuel's saying in his heart. And so this is what God answers. 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. "But the Lord said to Samuel, 'Don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him.' The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And that's how it was with the centurion. It was pretty easy for a Jewish man to judge the centurion, say, oh, he's a Roman soldier, therefore he's not a good man, or oh, he's a slave owner, therefore he's not good or godly. But that wasn't what was true in this centurion's heart. And we'll read more about what's going on in this man's heart. He's quite a neat man. So let's get back to um, I'm going to just start at verse 3. When the officer heard about Jesus, he sent some respected Jewish elders to ask him to come and heal his slave, for they earnestly begged Jesus to help the man. If anyone deserves your help, he does, they said, for he loves the Jewish people and even built a synagogue for us. I don't think that really made a big difference to Jesus, but verse 6 tells us that Jesus went with them. 6. So Jesus went with them. But just before they arrived at his house, the officer sent some friends to say, Lord, don't trouble yourself by coming to my home, for I'm not worthy of such an honor. I'm not even worthy to come and meet you. Just say the word from where you are, and my servant will be healed. I know this because I am under the authority of my superior officers, and I have authority over my soldiers. I only need to say, go, and they go, or come, and they come. And if I say to my slaves, do this, they do it. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed. Turning to the crowd that was following him, he said, I tell you, I haven't seen faith like this in all Israel. And when the officer's friends returned to his house, they found the slave completely healed. I like that story. Jesus was obviously impressed with this man recognizing authority. See, we know Jesus had authority to tell the sick to be well. And we've seen these miracles. Well, we read these miracles, and we may have seen them in our lives. But anyway, he has the authority. But this man wasn't even Jewish, and he was like, I understand authority. If as an officer in charge, I make a command, I don't go back and check and see if it was followed through. It was. That's what authority means. And so that's why Jesus is really, that's why he points it out. He was amazed. Turning to the crowd that was following him, he said, I tell you, I haven't seen faith like this in all Israel. And I want you to kind of see the connection between faith and authority, because when God's people know who they are, they walk in authority. And when they walk in authority, faith is just rises up. And this is how it was with this centurion. He knew who he was, and he was walking in authority. Of course, it was Roman authority. And so he knew that Jesus was walking in healing authority. And that equated with faith. Isn't that interesting? So now we continue on with the story. Oh, I did want to point out one thing. Do you see? Jesus did not touch the man, the slave. He did not see him even. He wasn't even near enough to shout, hey, be healed. But because Jesus had the authority, the spiritual authority, the man was healed. And I think perhaps these two miracles that we're going to read another one, they show a side of Jesus and his healing power that hasn't been revealed yet. Before, it was always people would come to Jesus, and he would, I don't know if he always laid his hands on people, but generally this is what you would see, him talking to the people, the man asking, heal me, or a person, the woman, whoever, someone asking, heal me, and Jesus healing them. But this is outside what we expected. This is so far out that Jesus hadn't seen the man, and the man actually may have been not had any idea what Jesus was doing because he might have been too sick. And so Jesus is doing this just on that authority. So then let's continue on. We're in verse 11. Soon afterward, Jesus went with his disciples to the village of Nain, and a large crowd followed him. Now, I looked up Nain on a map, and it's about 2 days' travel from Capernaum. And I can't help but be kind of curious as to why Jesus was there in Nain. It could have been that that was where the centurion lived, but I don't think so. And it could have been just Jesus was going around preaching. So anyway, he's in Nain now. Verse 12. A funeral procession was coming out as he approached the village gate. The young man who had died was a widow's only son, and a large crowd from the village was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart overflowed with compassion. "Don't cry," he said. Then he walked over to the coffin and touched it, and the bearers stopped. "Young man," he said, "I tell you, get up." Then the dead boy sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. What a story. What a story. There's some things that happened here that, again, they're kind of outside of the norm. This woman didn't ask Jesus to raise her son. Nobody did. I don't think any of them had even thought of asking Jesus to raise the dead. At this point, if she had known who he was, she would have maybe said, "I wish my son was still alive so you could heal him from being sick." But to expect Jesus to bring him back from the dead, I don't think it entered anybody's mind. So Jesus, out of his own heart, out of his own compassion, says, stops the whole funeral and, raises the boy from the dead and then gives him back to his mom. And how beautiful that is, how compassionate Jesus is, how much it shows his loving heart. And I did want to point out that a widow, even today to a great extent, but back then it wasn't expected that she could do anything to produce food. She wouldn't be able to go out in the field and work all day, or she wasn't allowed to own land unless, there were certain laws, but they were kind of confused. Anyway, so she was facing immense poverty. And so that's why they point out how tragic she's a widow and it's her only son. But that doesn't seem to be quite what draws the Lord. He saw other funerals, I'm sure, but whatever, something pulled out of his heart, and he was full of compassion, and he did it. And that's what really blesses me is how he did this from his own free will, him saying, "I just care about this. I need to help." These two miracles are really different. As humans, we want to have a formula. We want to follow the directions exactly. And if I know that I was going to bake bread and I know the directions, if I do what I'm supposed to do, at the end I'll have bread. If I was going to plow a field, then if I follow the directions, do what I'm supposed to do, at the end, I'm going to have a harvest. We like to have things just so. And when it comes to healing, I want to follow the directions. I want to go up to the person and say, "What do you need?" And I want them to say, "I need my eyes restored," or I'm lame, I need to be healed. And I want to touch them and pray just the right words, and they'll be healed. But Jesus doesn't do this. He breaks all of the little rules that we've been trying to set up. We're trying to organize things, and he breaks the rules. And I think this shows us that his healing and his care is so far beyond what we know. He's so much greater. We're continually, without doing it on purpose, We're continually putting Jesus in little boxes. You can't go any further than this, and you have to do it this way. And Jesus just is bigger than any box we can put him in. So healing doesn't come just in response to praying or just in response to somebody asking, although that is the normal way. Let's not try and make another rule that you never have to ask, that Jesus should just heal. So he wants us to ask, but we want to be like him. And that's the thing. I believe each of these miracles love and consideration. He was thinking about the centurion and his servant, and he was thinking about the ones who followed him. And in the next miracle, he's thinking about the widow and the boy who was dead, and the people carrying the coffin. He's aware of all these things because Jesus is so tuned into us, so aware of each one of us. And so he was able to work and touch each of those lives. He blessed the centurion for trusting that his slave would be healed. And he blessed the slave. I mean, the slave was healed. And he was willing to go and all the way to the centurion's house. So he blessed the people who could see how much he cared. And all of these things work together. So how do we apply this today in our lives? This is what all of the reading the Bible is about, is my relationship with God. How do I apply that in my life? And what I get from this is that he really cares. He really cares for me and mine. Recently, a friend of mine, husband, he had been sick and he died. People prayed. People that I respect prayed, and he wasn't healed. And you just have to just say to yourself, God is in charge. He knows what was best for my friend, and he knows what was best for my friend's husband. He knows about all of us who were praying for him. And the Lord chose to take this man, this friend of ours, home. This is, God is in charge. But never, ever, ever doubt that incredible compassion. He has compassion on this woman whose husband has just died, my friend. He has compassion on her. But he will take care of her. And she knows that she's going to grieve, like we all will. But she's going to come out and say, the Lord is good, and I trust him. And that's where I want you to be. I want you to look at these things, and it's okay to ask those questions. Why? Why did you heal this person in the Bible and not heal me? And why, when I pray, people sometimes get healed and sometimes don't? Ask the questions. The Lord is big enough to answer all your questions. He's big enough to answer your questions, but let's be really careful. He doesn't always answer those questions. A lot of times he just is like, I want you to trust me with those answers. I want you to trust me. Even if you don't understand why, I want you to trust me. So I want to finish this lesson with a book in the Bible. It's John. And now I've talked before about we have different Johns. John the Baptist never wrote a book in the Bible, but there was John, some people call him John the Beloved, and he did. He wrote one of the Gospels, and so it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And this is John, chapter 20, verse 30 to 31. So, let me see, 30. The disciples saw Jesus do many other miraculous signs in addition to the ones recorded in this book, but these are written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you will have life by the power of his name. And that's why when we're reading through Luke, we read all kinds of miracles. There was one where they brought out the people of the town, and he healed them all. That's what the Bible says. He healed them all. And there was another one where a man who was possessed with a demon, and Jesus killed the man. He called the demon out. And there'll be other stories that we read. And we want to study these things, these stories, for examples of healing. But we want to remember that Jesus did many others that we will never know about because they couldn't all be written down. And we also want to trust these are written. Let me see, how does he put it? These are written so that you might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And that's where we need to be and where we need to stand. So we're going to start in Luke chapter 7, verse 18 next. And I hope you're enjoying these studies. Thank you very much. See you next time on Ann Teaches Bible.